Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Well, howdy, folks. My name is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of The Exorcist Minute, a show where we examine, extrapolate, and excavate the scariest movie of all time.
Each episode covers a single minute of William Friedkin's 1973 horror masterpiece, The Exorcist.
If you like deep dives, this show is the deepest.
Did you know the film's iconic theme song, Tubular Bells, wasn't written specifically for the movie?
Or that the 1973 audience members were throwing up and fainting in the theater before they ever got a glimpse of the demon?
Or what about all the crazy on-set mishaps, cast injuries, the director firing real guns?
Ooh. Ever wonder where Ouija boards came from or how they got their name? How about some history on the Catholic Church or the Roman rite of exorcism? Or maybe we can tempt you with some juicy demonology lore. Did you know that Pazuzu had an ex-wife? Find The Exorcist Minute on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your shows or at theexorcistminute.com. Until next time, folks,
the power of The Exorcist compels you.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Generations Podcast, talking with very recurring guest Danielle S., written in the Star Wars on Twitter and on TikTok. Actually, that's not correct, but all the actual notes are in the show notes. But written in the Star Wars is kind of her nom de plume, and she has heads tonight.
Oh, great. I'm excited to talk about the season as a whole. I haven't gotten to do that yet, so looking forward to it.
Awesome. Glad to be the first prize. Yeah, and I think that's one thing that has been a subject of a lot of debate because the show came out, episode by episode, and a lot of people loved that pace. A lot of people did not. I have since had a chance to go back and watch the whole thing in one sitting. Have you had a chance to do that?
I haven't, but I was rewatching as the episodes came out.
Okay.
So kind of I did that week by week. So I haven't really done a full one with them, but I was able to kind of
Yeah, makes sense. Well, so now that we have episode 8, now that all the mysteries have been wrapped up, there's nothing more that we're wondering about. All of our questions have been answered. I say with a little bit of sarcasm, though, to be honest, I was quite happy with the ending for the most part. What do you think of the overall show?
I thought it was really good. I thought that it had, let me think how I want to word this. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, I feel like with some shows these days, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And either they go in thinking that they'll get another season and they don't. And so we get left with, not really an ending.
Mm-hmm.
Or it just doesn't feel complete on its own. I think that with the Acolyte, even though I'm fairly certain there's going to be a second season, it feels complete in and of itself.
Yeah.
Kind of like if we weren't to get a second season, I'd be disappointed, but not because I feel like the story's incomplete. I think the story they set out to tell for this season was told. And how successful I think that was in some parts is a different question, but I do think that it was a complete thing, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with a lot of the lore that we got that added to the franchise. I'm happy with the characters for the most part. And I'm excited to see what this could improve upon in other Star Wars shows and movies. For one thing, the choreography was really great. And I hope that they use whoever did the choreography for this show for the other live action shows and movies, because that was just phenomenal. And yeah, I overall I'm very pleased with it.
I wanted to say a quick word about the fighting and then talk about some of the larger stuff you brought in. This was the first time where I really felt like the Jedi are martial artists, and that they can fight with lightsabers, but also they can just do incredible things with their body. Some of the techniques that were used were basically the wire work that was so famous in Hong Kong Kung Fu movies for a long time. And it also were a big part of things like The Matrix and stuff like that. But also just the number of times where, for whatever reason, people wound up fighting each other hand to hand or using like more kicks. And we always see some of that, but yeah, I was really blown away by that. I felt like I learned so much more about the characters through that. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I agree. Especially them choosing whether they're going to fight hand to hand or with a lightsaber. That is character work, and I thought that was really
Very
great.
much so. In terms of this question of a second season, and I'm kind of glad we're just starting right there, I really agree with you that I think this is a complete season, a complete story, and I would love to see these characters again. I would love to see this director come back, although frankly, part of me hopes that it's difficult to get everyone back because people look at the work of Amanda Stenberg and Manny Jacinto. Is that how you pronounce it?
Manny Jacinto.
Manny Jacinto and Lee Zhangjae is not, wouldn't be coming back, but I also hope he gets the same treatment. I hope that all of them get so flooded with offers that it's hard to get them all back. But that being said, if we can, I would rather it be like a new show called The Apprentice, or about the Galactic Senate, and all these characters are there in it. I think for marketing reasons, of course, they'll still call it Acolyte Season 2. But yeah, I would kind of like it to be really a new story about the next chapter in because I think we do have, this is such a great sort of follow-up to the High Republic, and I think clearly leads some strands of how we get from here to the Phantom Menace. But there's a lot still to be answered in that in-between time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if there's a second season, I would like, I wouldn't mind so much if it's the same characters. I think there would need to be kind of like a pretty big time jump. Not huge, but I don't think I need to see Osha training.
Yeah.
Like, I know that opens up to a bunch of people being like, how'd she get so good? We didn't see her training, which they would do anyway if we saw her training. But it's like kind of one of those things that I don't know that I necessarily need to see that. I would really love to kind of jump into like he's been training her for a while. They're kind of doing their own thing, and I saw someone say like have it focus on more on the stranger and Vernestra in the way that this season was kind of focused on May and Osha and Sol. Have that similar thing, but with the stranger and Vernestra, and it will allow us to have flashbacks to when he was a Jedi. When Vernestra was his master, things like that. And I would be really intrigued by that because that would open up a different element of the story.
Yeah, I can see flashbacks there being. I want to be a little careful there because I think one of my complaints that we'll get to about the show is I didn't love the way they used flashbacks. But I do think that, again, to see more of those two in the past and also see more of what they're going to be like in the future, especially if, like, kind of leads into some interesting questions of, is Vernestra going to, because May has forgotten so much, but her latent force abilities are still going to be there. And so I didn't even thought of it until you said this, but yeah, an interesting thing of like the stranger and Osha and Vernestra and May and how those pairings are going to work and if they come into conflict.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of possibility there, and I hope we get to see it. Whether it's in another season, hope we get the rest of that.
Now, of course, if we talk about the future for the stranger and for Osha, one of the questions comes up about this, and I have some thoughts on that, but I said that in the last episode.
Yeah.
Do you think I kind of want to open the larger question of what you think the relationship of those three is, but I want to start by asking, do you think that Darth Biceps, the stranger, Chimere, is actually a like full Sith at this point in the story?
I don't think he is. I think that I think he partially is, in that obviously, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Plagueis is his master, his Sith master. And is it Plagueis or Plagueis? I always call him Plagueis.
So it was in the most canonical thing we have, it was Plagueis, which is in Revenge of the Sith, where the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. In audiobooks of the Legends canon book, Darth Plagueis, he's
either
yeah, nihil, do whatever you want.
But anyway, I kind of have it in my head that Plagueis is the stranger's Sith master, and the stranger doesn't necessarily know that he's there. And I think that the stranger is doing something that he's not supposed to be doing, because as is wont of the Sith, as they are going to do, they are going to try and break away. And I feel like with every Sith we want, a Sith wants an apprentice. A Sith is always in want, or the stranger to want that. And maybe Plagueis expected that, and that's why he's kind of keeping an eye on this. Or the stranger seemed very intrigued by when Sol said that May and Osha were the same person. And it's like he's heard of that. He's heard of the power of two. He's heard of these things. And so there's much more to that, to like what he knows about Osha's past and how she was created and all of these things than he's letting on. Or she's just not asked him. So I think it would be intriguing to see a Sith or someone who was trained in the Sith ways fall out of that to fall in love. Or by falling in love fall out of that. Maybe not intentionally so, but it would be a real like juxtaposition to Jedi falling in love and what that looks like.
Right.
And I think this is discussed a bit in the book The Rise of the Red Blade, which is about the fall and creation of an Inquisitor. Dark side, specifically the dark side as ruled by the Sith, doesn't allow for much more freedom than the Jedi Order did.
Right.
And even when it comes to, especially when it comes, I think, to feelings of love, because you'd be willing to give up things of the Sith way if you truly fall in love. And so I think it would be interesting to see like that perspective of it, if that makes sense.
I have a number of things I want to say about that. First, let me just say though, the book Danielle just mentioned, Rise of the Red Blade, we've actually done an episode about that. It's a great book, really opens a lot of interesting questions. And Danielle and I didn't see it entirely the same way. And I think we had a really good discussion about it. And that's, to me, the mark of a really good book.
Yeah.
It also gives me an excuse to say that we've entered into sponsorship deals with a couple of people. One is Audible. So if you want to listen to the book on tape, if you use the promo code Ethical Audible, and we're going to hopefully have a link to it directly in the show notes. You can get it that way. You can also get it through bookstore.org. I believe that's the name of it. It's a basically kind of an Amazon, but for independent booksellers. So you'll still get a book delivered to you. I think you can even get a Kindle version through them. If not, you can have to get that through Amazon. But hopefully affiliate links to all those things will be in the show notes. And if you purchase that way, you still get the same price, maybe even get a discount, and you also help out the podcast a little bit. Of course, another great way to help out the podcast is to become a member. For only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get all the bonus content that we offer. Danielle and I are going to have a little bit of a further conversation about romance in the Star Wars era as part of our bonus content. We also have an episode coming out specifically about the book Darth Plagueis, which gives you all sorts of background in the legacy canon, but clearly some of it's coming over about this character, Darth Plagueis, who was first mentioned by Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. So if you're interested in any of that, $5 a month, $55 a year, and you get that for both this podcast and Superhero Ethics, please become a member. All the information is in the show notes. All right, now that I've sold some soap, back to this actual conversation. One of the things that we talked about last episode is I like a lot of where your theory is going, and I especially like the love idea, because I was kind of on the side of I think he doesn't know that Plagueis is out there watching him, that he hasn't had contact with Plagueis yet. And Aaron made the point of what if Plagueis is actually mostly there for Osha, not as much because she's mentioned the stranger because of this variance. And either way, though, I think it could tie in more with your version as well. Because either way, the thing that I keep focusing on is when Soul asks him, "What are you?" And he responds, "There's no word really. You would call me Sith." Because to me, what that spoke to is the idea of, I did this whole thing about it a couple episodes ago, but for, the way that like the word Nazi 50 years ago, people would specifically mean members of the Nazi party. Today, they mean anyone who encompasses ideas that are similar to them. And neo-Nazis specifically, but also it has a broader term now. Same with fascist, which used to specifically mean this group in Italy. And I kind of like the idea that Sith would be kind of like that a dark side user would perhaps be called a Sith, even though that's actually not the truth. But whether or not he's that, one of the things I think that we did really see from him is that he doesn't seem to want to overthrow the Jedi. He doesn't seem to want to rule the galaxy. He's kind of the extreme libertarian who wants to be able to swing his arm wherever he wants to, and he doesn't care if it hits someone else and doesn't want people to interfere. And so on the one hand, I could see it as Plagueis doesn't care about him at all, but the other, I could see it as Plagueis has been grooming him somewhat, but now is maybe more interested in Osha. And that part of the triangle we get is that when Plagueis is like, okay, well, let's gear up for this grand plan to overthrow the Republic. And Chimera is like, I just want to be left alone. And maybe that's kind of where some tension comes in kind of what you were saying, is it because he is falling in love with Osha and that's what he wants. And he's been like, wait, aren't we all about emotion? Isn't that the whole point of the Sith? And there we get some interesting triangulation.
Yeah. I think that Plagueis is definitely interested in Osha because how she was created and who she might be, or like who she is because of how she was created, falls very much into his desires for creating life through the Force. And though we know that she wasn't necessarily create, like she was, but there were, there's intricacies to it. There's nuance there. She would be an important stepping stone into potentially finding out how to do that and if it's possible and things like that. And so I could also see him wanting to like use her
Mm-hmm.
and experiment on her maybe or something. And that's when the stranger is like, actually not okay with that.
Yeah.
Like, no, I actually love her and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that would be an interesting dynamic there as well. I also I like the way that you talked about the stranger not really having any interest in overthrowing the Jedi. He just wants to do his own thing. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like if Palpatine hadn't groomed Anakin, that is kind of how Anakin would have been. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I see Anakin as just like he just wants to do his own thing. Like
Yeah.
for the most part, he just wanted to do his own thing and not be told that he had restraints on him and that he had to follow certain rules. And it was mostly like Palpatine's influence on him that influenced his political views and his like more imperialist views.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's an interesting element to him.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that be really cool. And I also like we're talking about the Osha and May because, I've talked about this before, especially with like some Disney films and stuff like Frozen. I think when we talk about the importance of love, it's very easy for that only to be about romantic love. And romantic love certainly is very
Mhm.
powerful. But if you have something where the love between the stranger and Osha and the love between Osha and May are both important factors, one of which is romantic love, the other is just familial love, but both are very like very strong emotions, very strong attachments that will cause people to feel all the things they feel and want to defend those things. I think that could be a really interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, I agree. I was glad that Osha and May ended on relatively like good terms. Like
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really beautiful that May was finally wanted Osha to make her own choice, and that she realized that is primarily what drove Osha away in the beginning, was that she wasn't allowed to make her own choices. I liked that they finally had their hug and everything, and Osha seemed to get to realize everything that she hadn't before about May. But I also and I want to see more than that, but I feel so bad for May. I feel like she kind of got the shitty end of the stick
Mm-hmm.
here. And I don't know if that was like intentional. Like she just seems to continually just get kind of shafted throughout the whole thing. And I
Yeah.
saw someone say that like they grew up in the coven with May as like the advanced one, the one who could do everything and
Mm-hmm.
had more skill, honed her power more. And then once she leaves, it's like everyone's choosing Osha over
Yeah.
May for everything. The stranger chooses Osha over May. Soul chose Osha over May. And now Osha gets to keep her memory and leave while May loses everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess you could say like that is someone willing to make that sacrifice for their sister. But it's just kind of like over and over and over again. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if there is a second season, if there's a continuation to this story, if that would play anything into it. Um, because yeah, I mean, I guess I would make the same sacrifice for my sister. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but it just seems like she just hasn't had a break.
Yeah, and I'll say that's one of those points where if I had an overall critique of the show, it's that I felt like the overall execution was very well done, but sometimes when they had to get from like point 4 to point 5, it felt a little contrived. And they're like,
Yes.
the reason he can't take both of them is because his spaceship only has seats for 2. Like, that felt a little weak. And I certainly think you're right that if we get a season 2, granted, Star Wars kind of plays by its own rules, but still follows a lot of the kind of general dramatic rules that superhero shows and fantasy and sci-fi and things with people with special powers do. And one of the iron rules is if you erase a character's memory, that character will get their memory back at the exact moment when it is most traumatic and most likely that they will be angry at the people who did this for the right reasons if they think they did, like
Mm.
that's just a law.
Yeah.
In every comic movie you've ever seen. If someone loses their memory, you know it's going to come back at the worst possible time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I also think that part of the reason it was difficult for me, I think, to grasp it is that the character work with Osha and May in the beginning, I don't think was the strongest it could have been. In episode 4, is it? When they're on Kofar,
Mm-hmm.
and May decides to separate from the stranger. That happened so fast to me. And I get it that it's supposed to be like as soon as May realizes that Osha's still alive, she flips a switch. But we didn't even really get like a beat with her to kind of process that.
Yeah.
And I feel like the desire for the element of surprise on May's part overrode the need to me, like the narrative need to see her process that. And so it felt like it was just like a complete 180. And I didn't really like that. And similarly, I felt like the discussion about Osha's power didn't fit in with really what we were shown when it came to that. Like we didn't see much at all about that. We still don't know why Indara was insistent that she should leave the order. We don't know like what led up to Osha really leaving the order, anything. We don't know what her power is. We're just told that she's really strong in the force. We don't really ever see that.
Right.
And if I had like that's probably my biggest criticism is that we didn't get to see that. And I think if we had a couple more episodes, we would have been able to.
Yeah. I will say I found that I enjoyed it so much more watching it all at once. We're going to do a different episode about the like how this format of 30 to 40 minute episodes works. But I felt like so many more connections made sense, especially the day and night episodes back to back made so much more sense.
Yeah.
And I also felt like I was really recognizing how much time was being spent each episode on we got to make sure we have a fight scene every episode. We got to make sure we have a cliffhanger every episode. And if you get rid of some of that, or you should have more episodes, we have time for more of that character work.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think another thing that could have been done, the flashback scenes were basically presented to us. I think the first one was supposed to be Osha's memory of it, but that was never explicitly done. And the second one, I think, was very much supposed to be just like, no, this is the objective. Now you get to actually see it happen.
Yeah.
And granted, I'll admit, I love The Last Jedi and I love the Rashomon thing that they do there. I don't even think you need to do it that way. But I think if we'd had more of Osha narrating that first one and then May narrating that second one, that could have been a great way to give us a lot more insight into these characters, or just having the fact that they learned about it at different times while separated from each other, instead of them coming together and May telling, like Osha telling her memory of the story and then May telling her memory of the story to each other. I just think that if those flashbacks had been handled differently, you're right, there's other things that we needed too, but that would have been such a great way to give us a lot more of these characters because, one thing is like, I have very specific memories of when I was the age that happened, like 7 or 8, and those memories are colored by how I felt about things. The kid who bullied me, I only remember him bullying me, and the people who were friendly with me, I actually really think about it, like they bullied me sometimes too, and I probably was a bully sometimes too, but that's not what I remember, and so just getting to see how Osha and May each remembered their childhood differently, I would have loved.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily need it narrated, but I would have liked some framing of it in the present.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like in the previous episode with like Soul being like, I thought that's what they were doing. The episode before the second flashback, you kind of have the idea that Soul's going to tell May everything. But they never really circled back to that. You know what I mean? Like the next episode after the flashback, it wasn't like, and so like, this is what happened and everything. So they kind of exist in a space out with the narrative, the specific narrative they're trying to tell at that point. It's important to the narrative, but it doesn't fit in with the flow of it, I guess. It's not answering a specific, like, question for the characters. It's answering a question for the audience, but not necessarily the characters. And I think that's maybe where like the dissonance comes from a bit.
Yeah.
I had this idea that it would have been, and I think that this is they didn't do it this way because they were so kind of hell bent on the mystery element of it. That the show should have started with the first flashback that we got,
Oh,
like
yeah, that could have really
Osha's
worked.
perspective. And then when you come in later, mid-season, and show what really happened, and you're kind of hinting at it throughout,
Mhm.
you get these ideas like, did that really happen? Or does May, kind of similar to what we had, but on a bigger scale. And then it is answering the questions of the characters instead of just the questions that the audience has. I would have really liked that, but that would have taken away certain mysterious elements from them. And
Mhm.
I think they just were really gung ho on having that. And I don't know. I don't know. And I could have not worked out
Yeah.
if they did it that way. But I thought that would have been more interesting to me a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, so let's talk about Saul. Because last time we had him on, he was one of your absolute favorites, but we were a little sad that maybe he was not making the best decisions always. Where do you end up on Saul?
Okay. After the second flashback, I was still like, I mean, clearly he's not a horrible person.
Mhm.
He did not go into this with horrible intent. And the best intentions, we know what they say, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mhm.
And that is what happened with Soul. And I, after the flashback episode, I was like, I need to see how he reacts to May,
Right.
like what he says to her, what he does. I need there to be like, if there's an apology, and I was convinced that there was going to be an apology.
Yeah.
There wasn't. And I think that that was very intentional, not to
Mhm.
make people hate him, but because I think if he apologized to Osha's anger and her pain in the end would not have been as quiet as it was, I don't think, because I
Yeah.
think an apology from him would have made her, let me put it this way. Him apologizing to her genuinely for what he did, and her still killing him the way the narrative requires, would have pushed her, I think, too far
Yeah. Totally agree.
into the dark side, to where she can't be right now. That's not where it's not where the story
Yeah.
needs her. It's not where the story wants her. Um, it needed to be just enough to bleed the crystal, just enough for her to realize that she isn't a Jedi, and maybe she
Mhm.
never wanted to be one, actually. And so then I realized that he can't apologize. He can't apologize. He's just kind of like, doomed by the narrative, in that sense that
Mhm.
he can't apologize. Otherwise, the story goes in a direction it was never meant to go.
Right.
And I accepted that, but it also made me kind of view him, I think, through the eyes of Osha, uh, very still attached to him, and
Mhm.
like still have soft and sympathetic feelings towards him, but very upset with what he did,
Yeah.
and recognize that he wasn't a perfect person, and he made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not sure that he really realized the full extent of that,
Yeah.
even at the end. And that happens sometimes with our favorite characters. It sucks, but it does. And so I've accepted it. I've distanced myself from him a bit.
Yeah.
But I still don't think that he's an awful person.
I think the people who are saying like, "Oh, this proves he's a monster. He's always a monster," are completely missing the point.
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
I think what he did was horrific. And I think I
Mhm.
do believe in impact on intention. And I don't think
Yeah.
the point is that we should therefore like forgive him. I think the point is that we should see how easy it is for us to do that. Like, because for
Yeah,
me,
agreed.
especially in the first when we finally see what really happened, but even the first time I see what happened, I don't see him as being like, "Mwahaha, we need to have more kids for the Jedi," or
Yeah.
even his like, "I want a Padawan." I see him very much as the white social worker who goes
Mhm.
into a family structure that they don't understand and have had like racist feelings about or whatever. And so they see what they perceive through their very racist lens or their very classist lens or whatever it is as a child in danger. And therefore they and the rest of the Child Protective Services winds up starting a process that takes that child away from its family in ways that we now know can be incredibly damaging. And that's everything from like the modern care foster system, which sometimes is necessary, but I think most people would agree is too frequent, to every time, 17th, 18th, 19th century, like, social worker, or, like nuns or whatever would take children from native families or from black families or from any kind of family, just poor families, and give those children to rich white families. And I think we want to just think those people are monsters. And the truth is they were people who did what they thought was the right thing. And I think that's the real challenge, is like, can we ask ourselves, would we be able to do something different than Saul did? Because we should be able to, but it's hard. And I think that's why this show challenges us a lot more than a lot of other Star Wars does. And I think that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like people like didn't sit enough with what Soul saw versus what he didn't.
Yeah.
Because what he saw in the forest was a woman kind of manhandling these children and yelling at them and being very forceful with them. And that's why he followed them. That's why he went up and snuck in. And what he saw when he was there was Mother Anastasia using the Force against them.
Yeah.
And them having to defend themselves. And clearly one of them, Osha, couldn't defend herself. And then he didn't see anything of that. He didn't see any of the love there. And that, of course, isn't an excuse. It is a reason. It's not an excuse, because he should have asked more questions. He should have thought, maybe I'm only getting a snapshot of what this is. And maybe put it into perspective too, of like, what if, the Jedi Order were here and they saw some of the things we have, the kids do as well. Out of context, it looks pretty damning. And he should have approached it the way Indara was approaching it.
Yeah.
And I think things would have been a lot better.
Yeah, I think like you said, that lack of asking questions. What I was thinking in my mind is the great Ted Lasso speech about curiosity. He didn't have any curiosity to better understand the situation.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
Here's a connection that I was thinking of that I wonder if you are making, because one you and I talked about a lot. In Andor, we talked about how one of the things we disliked most was that, I forget the woman's name, it's something with an M, but Marva, thank you. She sees Cassian in a situation where she believes, not knowing much about the situation, that he's in incredible danger. And so I think very much like Saul, does what she thinks is the right thing and takes him away from that situation. And we were frustrated that the show didn't seem to realize how bad what she did was, and that we never had clear he had like some sad feelings about it, but he never really confronted her in any way before her death. I don't know if this show was written like if Leslie Headland had that same thought in mind at all, but it felt to me like this was somewhat of an answer to that scene. Saul is put in a fairly similar situation, very different in a lot of ways, to be sure, but similar situation, and he does something similar to what Marva does, but the narrative is much more critical of him than it was of Marva.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of my biggest frustrations to come out of this is that yes, I think people are quick to be very much like, this proves the Jedi are the bad guys actually, or which is just not allowing for any nuance or criticality at all. But that some of the same people who are saying that and who are judging Soul so harshly for this don't bat an eye at what Marva did.
Yeah.
Or are sometimes the first people to defend what she did. And I'm like, it's no different.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I would actually argue that what Marva did was worse because there's no criticality in Andor of what she did. There's not a moment of there's Clem saying he has people here, and then that's it. We never get any other recognition of how what she did could be so damaging and harmful and hurtful to Cassian. And so I was just like, if you're gonna have the same criticism of Soul, which you should, then you should also have that criticism of Marva.
Yeah.
And you should, stop telling people to stop complaining about the fact that we didn't get that
Mm-hmm.
criticism of it. And I just think it's interesting
Yeah.
that I've definitely seen a group of people who uh, I know for a fact do not care about what Marva did, but
Mm-hmm.
care a lot about what Soul did.
Yeah.
And just kind of like, it's the same thing. So,
Well, and I think that's both the power and why it's so important to examine what the narrative is telling you.
yeah.
Because the narrative
Yeah.
tells you to be critical of Saul. It doesn't tell you to be critical of
hmm
Marva. And
Yeah.
the more we think about it, the more I hope, and especially, let me say that again. The more I think about it, the more I hope that Leslie Headland did that somewhat intentionally. And knowing
Mm.
everything I do about her and her perspectives, I think that's very likely. I
Mm.
think that given that she wants to stay within the Lucasfilms Disney, team, being
Mhm.
openly directly critical of another part of it, particularly the kind of like often regarded as one of the flagship shows of it right now, is probably
Mm.
not very strategically good for her career. So I don't think she's going to say anything about it. But I would love if maybe in like 20 years or so, when she's retired and very done with Star Wars, she said, "Yeah, I was a little I loved Andor, I love Star Wars, everything was great, but I was a little bothered by that, and so I wanted to maybe show that same kind of a story in a different light."
Yeah, that would be cool. I'd appreciate that.
For sure. But I'm also totally okay if she doesn't, because again, I don't want her to get
Yeah.
blacklisted, and like you can't
No,
really
of course not.
trash the others. I want to talk some more about the Jedi themselves, but particularly because you and I have been talking so much about the High Republic, and we brought this up a little bit in some of the other episodes I've done, but I want to dive deeper, particularly with the character of Vernestra, but also in general. Like, the High Republic books are about a turning point for the Jedi and a really difficult moment that the Jedi have to go through and what that does to them.
Mm.
With the idea that I think kind of like starting the slide that takes us to the Jedi of Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars and the eventual fall. Where do you see this as kind of how do you see this as kind of like a midpoint between the High Republic books we've gotten until now and where we wind up in Phantom Menace?
Yeah, I think it's done a really good job at being a midpoint, both with their use of Vernestra and I think with their use of like costuming and just like the visual aspects of it, because you
Mhm.
have still costumes that are reflective of the High Republic, of what we see, on the book covers and in the comics and everything, especially when it comes to temple robes and everything that Vernestra wears. But then you also have their more kind of mundane mission robes, which we have mission robes in the High Republic book series. But these are the ones we see here in Acolyte are leaning much more heavily towards kind of the dreary drab of
Mhm.
the prequel series. And I thought that was really interesting. That helped me kind of place this.
Yeah.
I think when I watched the first two episodes, that physicality of it, the visualness of it, helped me be like, exactly, like this feels like a natural follow up
Right.
to the High Republic book series. And I love that they used that they saw what the power of this costuming could do. But also with Vernestra, I know that there are some hardcore Vernestra stands who are not happy with how she's portrayed in the show. But
Mm.
I actually really agree with what they've done with her character,
Yeah.
because I think it might be hard for people who haven't read the books to be sympathetic towards her, um, because they don't know what all she's been through,
Mhm.
just kind of like the terrors and trauma that she's had to deal with at a very young age, when she was only 17, 18 years old. And that affects a person greatly. And I think it kind of inspires how she views the Jedi, how she
Mhm.
views non Jedi, and especially how she views the Senate. I mean, a lot of people were agreeing with the senator who kind of, who argued with her in the last
Mhm.
episode, and saying that he was right. And yeah, but how did the Jedi get to where they were? It,
Yeah.
it wasn't on their own. It was with help from the Senate. Like,
Mhm.
not maybe not even with help from them, but being led by the Senate to be in this position that they're in. And I saw someone make the argument that essentially that senator gets what he wants, and look what happens then.
Mhm.
Like, look where the Jedi are in the prequels, so tied up into the Senate that you can't tell one from the other.
Right.
And that they're no longer allowed to do what they think is correct because they have to answer to the Senate even more than they did in the past. And it reminds me a lot of, I think, the debate in Captain America: Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
About, are you team Tony or team Cap? The thing with that is, like, where if the Senate have more control over the Jedi, what are they going to do with the Jedi, essentially?
Right.
And it's this power that both parties want to control, and it's a power that shouldn't be controlled. And just all the conversations that go along with that, I think, was really excellent. And so I'm very pleased with how they wove Vernestra into this story, because she's the perfect character to know what it used to be like,
Mm-hmm.
and to know the dangers of what can happen when people outside the Jedi Order are a threat to the Jedi. And I can see why she would want to keep it from them.
Yeah.
I completely understand her point of view. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she did,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think she's the villain here either. I think she's someone who desperately wants to do the right thing and wants to protect her people,
Mm-hmm.
but isn't quite sure. Like, is just kind of winging it along the way.
So this is so interesting, because I think I both completely agree with you, and I also have a very different take on it. And I think that's part of the point, is that it's the nuance, it's the richness, because all these issues, both in our own lives and in stories like this, are much more complex than they want them to be. Because what I see in Vernestra is the police union. I see the cops wanting to say no, we don't want a civilian review board. We need to protect ourselves. And we live in a world of ACAB and of being very, very critical of the police, especially in the country I live in, the United States, and I think for very, very good reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that what we can often forget is that part of have you seen the TV show The Wire?
No.
Fantastic show. We're going to do a whole episode about it and the Acolyte in a couple weeks. I'm just going to give a quick thing of this here. One of the things that it really highlights is this idea of what happens when something becomes an institution. And whatever it is, the police, the educators, the government, church, unions, that you get a group of people together who want to do a good thing. And the reason they're all together is to do the good thing. And at some point in time, people attack them and say, no, you shouldn't be doing the good thing. And so it starts to become like we have to defend our ability to do the good thing, to the point of the good thing is keeping us alive no matter what the cost, so that we can do the good thing. And that's very much where I see Vernestra. And I agreed, I do think the Jedi in this world are nowhere near as bad as police in our own world. So it's a loose metaphor, but to me, when I see Vernestra doing that, it's very much I am willing to break the principles of the Jedi. I'm willing to lie and all these things, because we, the Jedi, were the only ones who could stop Marchion Ro. We were the only ones who could stop the Nihil. We're the only ones who can stop this Sith or whatever it is. And so we have to do it ourselves. And if that means lying, or in what they do with Saul, as when I hear her say no, Saul is just a rogue Jedi, that he's not really one of us. I hear all the police who came out and been like, oh, Derek Chauvin, he's not a real police. He wasn't one of us. He was a rogue. Again, I think Vernestra is at a much higher point on the slippery slope of where that leads to. But it's I can completely sympathize with Vernestra. I can completely sympathize with Senator Reyenberger. You kind of want to shake everybody and be like, everybody take a deep breath and stop being so defensive. But that doesn't happen, and that you kind of see how this is going to lead in 100 years to all that's happening.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's interesting, because clearly Vernestra knows that the council is not the end all be all.
Right.
We see that in the books lately, or we've been seeing that lately in the books from her. And we hear it from her in The Acolyte, where she intentionally keeps this away from them, mainly because they would have to tell the Senate, and she doesn't want the Senate to know. But I think she also accepts that, the Jedi Order isn't what maybe she once believed that it was. And so I'm really intrigued by what her main pull was to lie.
Yeah.
Because when when she starts kind of thinking about using Soul as the scapegoat for everything, it's after she realizes that her old apprentice is there and that
Mhm.
he is still alive. And I can't help but wonder if maybe this is a little bit more selfish on her part,
It could be.
of not wanting people to interfere before she has a chance to figure out what happened with
Mhm.
her old Padawan.
Yeah.
She clearly thought he was dead. He's not. If she allows people to know that this dark side user, whatever she would call him at the time, is the reason for all of this, or one of the reasons for all of this, then she has to answer some questions that she probably isn't ready to answer. And she has to allow people, in the same way that she wanted to do to Soul, she didn't want Soul to be involved in the investigation. Um, Other people would not want her to be involved in the investigation. And so I kind of wonder if it's not so, if it is an element of what you said. I absolutely agree.
Mhm.
But also maybe her kind of being like, I need to take control of this. I need to control the narrative
Yeah.
so that I can figure this other thing out.
Well,
Um, yeah.
especially because I might be alone in this, but I think I've seen some other people who argued as well. Like those scars on Kymir's back, they look to me like scars I've seen of people who've been whipped. And we know that she has a.
I don't want to believe that.
I
That is
know, I
her.
know, I know, and I
I listen. Well, I was gonna say that I'm holding on for dear life to this fact that when Osha asks the stranger about this, he doesn't give her an answer. He lets her think whatever she wants to.
right.
And honestly, for him, the best route she could go, that she could assume, is that it was his Jedi master who did this to him. That works in his favor
You're right.
if she thinks that. And so I'm clinging to the fact that he was relying on that, and that's why he didn't give her an answer. He didn't even affirm to
Mhm.
her that that's what she said. And if we know from like Leslie Headland and the writers, is that he's not lying to her. He's not telling her anything that's untrue, but that doesn't mean he's not allowing her to think things that
Right.
aren't true. And so I'm holding on to that, that it wasn't her and that it
Mhm.
was actually Plagueis. And it just worked more to his benefit to let
Yeah,
her think that it was his master.
that is certainly possible. And yeah, it's like going back to kind of where we started. It's why I think the story I really want to see is like, and granted, this is what I've always wanted. I don't know if I'll ever get it, but cross like West Wing, Scandal, and Veep, and give us like the
Yeah.
political drama where like Rayenberger is a major character, Vanessa's a major character, and the Sith are kind of pulling the strings, in some ways.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've said before, I don't like when the Sith are directly involved too much, but I would love it if it was things like Plagueis had noticed that this guy Rayenberger was really critical of the Jedi, so he kind of like subtly encouraged Rayenberger's career,
Mm.
or maybe like Plagueis was one of the first to figure out about this Vergence, or it even like influenced those witches in some ways, and so like through his intermediaries, he dropped some clues to make sure that the Jedi go to Brendok right around this time.
Yeah.
Like that kind of like I don't want if they tell me Rayenberger is a Sith agent, I'll be like, that's really boring. But tell me that
Yeah.
Rayenberger really
Yeah.
believes this, but the Sith are like just pull it like, oh, I think that could be such a great story.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be fun.
We'll get it. Um, we've got a while. I want to kind of start moving us towards wrapping up, but I want to just ask, why do you feel we talked about the Jedi? I feel like also this story really explores what the dark side is. What do you feel like this story? What did you get about the dark side from this story?
Well, I think Leslie Headland was 100% correct when, like, you can see that she was curious about the seduction of the dark side.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing I really liked about the exploration of it in this show is that um, Osha's fall, and I use the word fall loosely,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a tragedy, really.
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's the first time we really see definitely in, Star Wars, like, TV shows or movies, this pull to the dark side that's not just a complete, trauma. It's not meant to be viewed as something that is like a sad thing. Like when you think about like Revenge of the Sith, when or really the entire prequels of Anakin slowly falling and then finally falling in Revenge of the Sith, it's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't what you want for him. This isn't freedom for him. This
Yeah.
is just him being chained to another master. And that's just, he loses so much in the process, and that is
Yeah.
heartbreaking. You know, Maul, he doesn't really fall, but you know, everything he has to go through, he loses so much. He loses his freedom. That's heartbreaking. And Ben Solo, he ends up killing his father. He ends up, all of these
Mm-hmm.
things are just absolutely heartbreaking. But with Osha, she doesn't lose anything by this. She gains
Yeah.
everything. She gets her sister back. She gets the attention of someone who wants to cultivate her power and wants to encourage that in her, wants to encourage all the things that she's been told to hide away and all the things she felt like she can't show, wants to encourage that out of her. She gets to understand her power better. She gets the truth for the first time in her life. She gets
Mm-hmm.
the option to choose for the first time in her life. And for Osha, really taking this step to the dark side is freedom for her.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first time we've really been shown it that way. And that perspective of it drives the narrative, I think, to the
Mm-hmm.
point where it can be really easy to say, oh, I think the dark side's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
Or that it's, you know, it's actually the right way to go 100% of the time. And I've seen some people like talk about that,
Sure.
and I'm like, I don't think that's the point, actually.
Yeah.
There's perspective, and we need to learn what perspective is meant to do and what it's about. But it is really intriguing to see how it would be. Like, I think when Leslie Headland said seduction, a lot of people assume she meant like, oh, like, you know, like the sexy seduction,
Right.
100% through the stranger, but not really. Just like the seduction of having everything you've wanted and actually getting it for a moment.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And I think the show is very successful in showing
Mm-hmm.
that. Maybe a bit too successful in showing that.
Well,
But yeah, I like that.
so I have two thoughts, and the second one is going to be kind of a counterpoint to that. But the first, just in terms of what you're saying about Osha, you know, audiences enjoy revenge fantasies. I'm the same way.
Mhm.
Like, I am, in terms of the real world, dead set against the death penalty. I don't ever
Mhm.
believe that someone should get to decide someone else should die. I think self-defense is something different. But the idea of like, we will feel better because this person is dead is something I think
Yeah.
government and society should have nothing to do with.
Yeah.
But when I see Joffrey Baratheon die, do I not feel like, yeah, get it, you bastard? Of
Yes.
course I do. And, you know, the whole like, particularly women characters getting to do that, you know, the whole like, I support women's rights and women's wrongs. Like, I think that's kind of
Yeah.
what Osha is.
Yeah.
But I think, and maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong, and that's totally fine. I think this was really trying to show us another aspect of the dark side, though, which is that it's not like the word side feels kind of wrong to me, of like you're either on this side of the line or that side of the
Mm.
line. And it's more a kind of like a force of gravity almost that like can pull you in different directions, the light side and the dark side and things like that. And that people
Mhm.
can be more or less influenced by it at different times. You know, certainly like
Mhm.
Anakin, long before he fully falls, I think, you know, what he does to the Tuscans is very much like the dark side in Anakin, when he like
Mhm.
goes and kills all the women and children and the people who killed his mother. So I think that, because what I'm getting to is that I do think there's a dark side tragedy in this story, and it's
Mhm.
Saul. Because
Oh,
Saul
yes.
never becomes a Sith, like but I think by the end, he is very much being influenced out of the things that are like, if the idea of the dark side is that, you know, your emotions will cloud your judgment to the point where you're not able to like see reason and see rationality, and you're able to just be like,
Mm.
anything I do is justified, anything people do against me is
Mm.
wrong. That's exactly where Saul is.
Mm.
And yeah, to me, I really loved that because it's the idea of like, she wants revenge, and so did May, and that's kind of what we often think of. For him, it's purely out of love. You know, it's really
Mm.
the kind of like the much better version, I think, in some ways, of the Anakin story of the like,
Mm.
I love people and I want to protect them and I'm attached to them and I have my own ego wrapped up in them, and that's what
Mm.
takes me where I go.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective that I don't really disagree with. I actually think that it is interesting to we expect the dark side tragedy to come from the revenge, the want for revenge. But you're right. Like, Anakin's dark side tragedy comes primarily from his possessive love, his inability to accept that he doesn't know everything about this, and that he can't control everything. And with Soul, it makes sense that that would also be the avenue that it would maybe kind of permeate. That his love does become possessive to the point where he decided what was best for Osha and May. He decided all of these things. He kept things from them. He thought that because he loved them, that explained away everything, and it doesn't. And I've also seen people talk about, just how far he was falling from what Jedi do, which is, allowing his possessiveness and attachment, his possessive attachment to Osha color everything that he was doing. But also when he fights the stranger on Brindok in the last episode, he uses a move that I can't remember the name of. There's a specific name for it, where he turns off his lightsaber in the middle of them clashing, and that allows him to destroy the stranger's lightsaber. Because it's an element of surprise. It's a dishonorable way of fighting, and the Jedi do not practice that very often.
Right.
And he uses that. And that is another, to me, especially after hearing your perspective of it, is an indication of him falling for dark side antics, and relying on those instead of the way that he was taught.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that is a really interesting perspective. I like it.
Cool. So I think as I said, about time to wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit more about romance and the seduction of the dark side and seduction of biceps that go on for days. But any other last things you want to say about this, or just kind of like how people can find more about you?
I guess last things, I am really happy that we finally have something in Star Wars that was, led by a Black actor, and that the love story is to people of color. I think that it's about damn time in Star Wars. And so I really hope that that this show is allowed to continue, and that it gets the support that it deserves, because even though it wasn't perfect, nothing in Star Wars is, I would like to see more of it. And I would like to see more of Leslie Headland's work. I would like to see her get a little bit more time too, if that's something that she wants. But yeah, you can find me on TikTok at WrittenIntheStarWars and Twitter at DannyS394. And that's where I'm mostly talking about the bear these days. Sorry, Star Wars, but I am a little not well about the bear, so it's consumed my mind.
I admit, this most recent season, I stopped watching after a couple of episodes because I was so frustrated. But if we can do an episode on it, the thing is, I have to remind myself, because I make the mistake of watching things like The Bear. Like last night, I watched the Jon Favreau movie Chef. Which, have you seen that?
No, but I know of it.
It's where basically he got like all of his friends at the MCU to come make a movie with him. Even like I at some point he said to someone like, "Hey, listen, you did all the awesome special effects for Iron Man and Spider-Man. Can you make this like tiny little bird fly away from the screen every time someone tweets a message?" And the guy probably was like, I make buildings explode. You want a bird?
Why?
But it's a fantastic movie. It's very, very good. But yeah, I've learned that I have to plan, because if I watch one of those shows or talk one of those shows and don't have easy access to the food that the show is about, I'm going to be very angry. I just stopped watching the first season of The Bear in order to get myself an Italian beef sandwich and then keep watching. Yeah. Anyway, that's all off topic. We're going to be talking about love and romance and biceps and all the rest of it in our bonus member section. You can become a member for only $5 a month, $55 a year. All the information is on the show notes. Also, please give us your feedback. We're probably just going to at this point do a quick feedback episode, so keep not having time for it. That's my bad, because we've gotten some great feedback about this show. So to those who've sent it in, I promise you it's going to come soon. But for now, thank you on behalf of myself and Danielle. We have spoken.